Too many Christians teach that the 70th week of Daniel is in the future. They say the final 7 years of Earth's history is the 70th week of Daniel and will be a time of tribulation. But think about it. There can only be a 70th week if there are 69 weeks before this. Therefore, alone the 17th week of Daniel must have been fulfilled in the past. However, mainstream Christianity says there has been a gap ever since the 69th week. But can we just have a look at the facts together? I must say in advance, in this video, I do not deal with the 490 years. There is, however, a very interesting video out there that can show you how you can have a look at these 490 years. I will leave a link in the description below. Now let's read Daniel 9 verse 24 to see what the purpose was for Israel in the days of Daniel. Israel, by the way, is never just about the land. Mostly it deals with the people of God. And that's why Daniel still talks about Israel, even though they are no longer in the land itself, as you can read in the verses 7, 11, and 20. See also the video on what's new about the new covenant. Daniel 7:24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up division and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So the people of Israel were supposed to finish the transgression, make an end of sin, make reconciliation for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal up division and prophecy, and anoint the most holy. Now all these things had to be completed within these 70 weeks of years. How were they supposed to do this? It would be done by accepting their salvation, which means Yeshua in Hebrew, and so therefore all 6 points would have been fulfilled by Israel. But since they as a people failed, Jesus Yeshua himself would fulfill all 6. We also need to keep in mind that Jesus Yeshua walked the same journey as the people of Israel did. He was the one who came out of Egypt when Israel was called son, as we can read in Hosea 11:1 and Matthew 2 verse 15. He spent 40 days in the wilderness like the Israelites did, 40 days for 1 year, as we can read in Numbers 14:33. He was the messenger of the covenant and the one keeping the covenant, as we can read in Malachi 3 verse 1 and Hebrews 9 verse 15. He celebrated Passover knowing he would be the lamb slain for the atonement of all. He fulfilled the prophecies of his coming, like the ones in Genesis 49:10, Isaiah 7:4, and Zechariah 12:10. And he was the one who sanctified the temple when he came to his father's house, just as the Father sanctified the temple of Solomon when it was filled with his glory, as we can read in 2 Chronicles 7 verse 1 and 2, and Exodus 29:43. So let's read verse 24 again and see what the words really mean. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up division and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now, in order to understand the deeper meaning of these verses, we cannot just read them in English or any other language, but the original. Only then we can find the true meaning. The word determined is in the Hebrew hatak, and it means either to determine, but it can also mean be marked out. Upon thy people is simply am in the Hebrew, and it means a people or a nation, but it can also mean a tribe as those of Israel. To finish transgression, finish means kala, And it means not just to finish, but it can also mean to restrained. The word transgression is the Hebrew pesah, and it means either transgression or rebellion. And it could be transgression against individuals, a nation, or against God. And looking at the context, I think we need to read transgressions against God. So the tribe of Israel would get a marked period of in time to restrain sinning against God. Let's look at step number 2, to make an end of sin. And the English word end is the Hebrew word hatam, and it means to seal up, or as you can see on the screen, it means to be stopped. The word sin is hatat, and it can either mean sin or sin offering. And taking this knowledge into consideration, we see that step number 2 is the sin offerings are to be stopped. Step number 3 was to make reconciliation for iniquity. To make reconciliation is the Hebrew word kapar, and it means to cover over. And the English word iniquity is the Hebrew aon, and it can either mean iniquity or it can mean guilt or punishment of iniquity. And step 3 is therefore the guilt or punishment would be covered. Now that would bring us to step number 4, to bring in everlasting righteousness. To bring in is the Hebrew word bo, and it means to bring to pass. And righteous, of course, is the Hebrew tzedek, can mean justice, rightness, and righteousness. But it can also mean, in this case, righteousness as vindicated, as in of people enjoying salvation. And because the guilt would be covered, now it would bring to pass a people enjoying salvation. Step number 5 is to seal up the vision and a prophecy. Seal up is the same word used for end, hatam, and it means, as we can see, to be stopped. The vision in this case means the Hebrew hazon, and it either is a vision or it can mean an oracle or a word from God. And the word prophecy is the Hebrew word nabi. However, the word nabi means prophet and not prophecy. And therefore it should read prophet and not prophecy, because again the word nabi is used 370 times in the Old Testament, and they all deal with the prophet as in a person, not a prophecy. Somehow only the translators use prophecy in this verse alone instead of the word prophet. If this verse was talking about prophecy, the writer of Daniel would have used the word nebuah. That means prophecy. So step number 5 reads as follows. The oracle of the word, or the word of the prophet, would stop. And this makes perfect sense, because all the prophecies about the first coming of the Messiah would be stopped once he would enter the scene. Step number 6 would be fulfilled, to anoint the most holy. The Hebrew word for anoint is masah, and it means either to anoint or, as we can see, to consecrate. The most holy is kodesh, of course. It means partners or holiness. In this case, it deals with a holy place, which is the tabernacle, or in this case, the temple. Combine all this together, we can see that the sanctuary would be consecrated, just as the tabernacle was consecrated when God entered in Exodus 29, verse 43. Thus, the second temple was consecrated when Jesus, Yeshua, walked in it. So again, the tribe of Israel would get a marked period of time to restrain sinning against God, to stop the sin offering, so that the guilt or punishment would be covered. And that would bring to pass a people enjoying salvation, and therefore the oracle or prophecy of the prophets would stop, as in have no need, and the sanctuary would be consecrated. Now the next 2 verses, verse 25 and 26, give more details on the timeline of the 70th week. And God gives specific details about the timing and coming of Messiah the Prince, so that they won't miss it. Actually, Jesus announced it himself in Mark 1, verse 14 and 15. After the arrest of John, Jesus went into Galilee and proclaimed the gospel of God, saying, "The time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God is near." And looking back, Paul also points to this time in Galatians 4, verse 4, Ephesians 1, verse 10, and 1 Timothy 2, 6. Let's continue. Verse 25 reads, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again and the wall, even in the troubled times." So the people of Daniel would get 69 weeks, starting from the commandment to turn back to Jerusalem and rebuild it, so that their Messiah would come to the temple when the 69 weeks were finished. Did they fulfill this part? The people of the prince did rebuild the city of Jerusalem, and they did build a second temple, just not according to the blueprint given to Ezekiel, and hence the reason why God did not come down with fire to fill the temple with his presence, as he did in the temple of Solomon. Verse 26, "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And until the end of the war desolations are determined." Messiah shall be cut off. What does that mean? Will the Messiah be killed, or will he make a covenant? Since the Hebrew cut off is karat, and has several meanings, and one of them is making a covenant. In this case, it probably means both. He was killed, offer up for the sins of men, and confirm the covenant made with men. Who are the people of the prince? Now the people is translated as we have seen earlier in verse 24, and therefore refers to Israel, since Daniel uses the same word for Israel in the entire chapter 9. The word prince is the Hebrew word nagid, and is being used for the kings of Israel. It's used for Saul in 1 Samuel 9 verse 16. It's used for David in 2 Samuel 5 verse 2. And it's used for Solomon in 1 Chronicles 29 verse 22. And now also for Messiah the Prince, Yeshua, Jesus, the son of David. By killing their own Messiah, they, the people of the prince, have caused the temple, their sanctuary, to be destroyed, which is what Yeshua said in Matthew 23:28, "Your house shall be left desolate." Read also John 19 verse 15 and Matthew 27:25. "And the end thereof shall be with a flood." Now what does that mean? So this flood or judgment was fulfilled in 70 AD, after 40 years of probation. At the end, and the end is in the Hebrew kes, and it means a definite time, at the end of a definite time. Of course, that would refer to the 70 weeks. That was a definite time for the Jews. A flood, now some would say this refers to the flood of Noah. But if it would refer to Noah's flood, they would have used the word Mabul. The word flood, shetev, that is being used in this verse, however, is different than the word flood, Mabul, used for Noah's flood. The word Mabul used 12 times in Genesis for the flood of Noah, and once it is used in Psalm 29:10, but there it also refers to the flood of Noah. So flood in this verse does not refer to the flood of Noah, but the word flood, shetev, means judgment. It's the Hebrew way of saying judgment is coming. And according to Josephus, it wasn't the Romans who started the fire, but the Jews. Now the first part of verse 27 shows us what happens in the last week, the 70th week. It was the beginning of the end of the old covenant. 27a, "And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease." Now in the 70th week, aka the last 7 years that Israel was given, we read that he would confirm the covenant with many. But after 3.5 years, which is in the middle of the week, his death would cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Now, the Hebrew word for sacrifice is zebah, and it could mean sacrifice, but it could also mean the Passover sacrifice, so a specific sacrifice. Oblation is an offering. Mina, that is the Hebrew word, and it could mean offering to God. And to cease is the Hebrew word sabbat, which you can already recognize the word in it, which is to rest. So his death caused the Passover offering to God was about to come to rest, to an end. 27b, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Now the killing of the he would be a huge abomination that causes the desolation of the temple. However, the explanation of verse 27 depends very much on which translation one uses. Many translations cause confusion because they insinuate that the he in verse 26 is not Messiah the Prince, but is Antiochus or Titus, like, for instance, the NIV and the CEV. Let's read both verses. The NIV reads, after the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolation have been decreed. Now let's read CEV translation. At the end of the 62 weeks, the chosen leader will be killed and left with nothing. A foreign ruler and his army will sweep down like a mighty flood, leaving both the city and the temple in ruins, and war and destruction will continue until the end, just as God has decided. So these translations push toward a leader different than Messiah the Prince. But let's think about it. Neither Antiochus or Titus made a covenant with many. Now, could the many refer to Mark 14:24, where Jesus says, "This is the blood of the new covenant which is shed for many"? And if that is the case, again, the he would be Yeshua, Messiah himself. Eliot's commentary for English readers confirms this. It says, according to this interpretation, the covenant refers to the agreement which the prince makes with a large number of persons who become apostates. But the word covenant does not apply to any such agreement, but rather to a covenant with God. And in Daniel 9 verse 26, it is the people of the prince and not the prince which is the subject of the sentence. It is therefore more appropriate to take Messiah as the subject. During the last closing week of the long period mentioned, Messiah, though cut off, shall confirm God's covenant with many, that is, with those who receive him. So a better translation would be from the NAT Bible, which reads, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of that week, he will bring sacrifice and offerings to a halt. On the wing of abominations will come one who destroys, until the decreed end is poured out on the one who destroys. Read also 1 Thessalonians 2 verse 14 and 16, where Paul tells the Thessalonians that the Jews in the days of Jesus did not only kill their own prophets, but they also forbid to bring the good news to the Gentiles so that they won't get saved. Talk about abomination. However, their doom was almost full, for within the 20 years the temple would be destroyed and left desolate. You can also read some verses in Isaiah about the promised Messiah, like Isaiah 42:6 and Isaiah 53:11. As a closing, what was the original purpose of Israel? That was to be a light to the nations, and to bring the nations back to God and to receive the Messiah so that all will be saved. You can read this in Isaiah 49 verse 5-7, Luke 2 verse 32, and Acts 13 verse 4. Thankfully, Jesus Yeshua walked the same journey as ancient Israel did. Yet he remained obedient and was therefore able to fulfill all the covenant promises. Now, even though the 17th week was fulfilled by Yeshua Jesus, it does not mean it has no significance for the end-time people of God. Since Daniel receives prophecies for the time of the end, it might just be so that Satan, as an angel of light, uses this prophecy to mislead God's people. I hope this study has been a blessing for you. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If this was any help, please share the video as much as possible. Shalom.